Brigadier General Hanna.
Good morning, everyone. Great to see you back for our third day. It's my honor and privilege to introduce retired General Vincent K. Brooks. Like many of us here, General Brooks grew up in the Army. His dad was a career Army officer who was commissioned from Virginia State University in the mid-1950s and worked his way up to colonel at a time when it was not common to see African Americans in positions of leadership. General Brooks's older brother was recruited into West Point, and a few years later, General Brooks followed him at West Point. These experiences made him uniquely qualified to tell the Army story, a story that he not only lived his entire life, but one that he believed in and was eager to share with others. He served as our Chief of Public Affairs from 2004 to 2006. Back then, we were preparing for the Army of today. Today is going to tell us about some of the experiences and how he supported the role of public affairs professionals as a senior commander at division, USARPAC, and USFK levels, and how he has truly reorganized his communications team at those levels. Sir, we look forward to your remarks.
Okay. Thanks, Amy. All right. All right. Good morning, everybody. Good morning. I just experienced a 17-mile drive that took 1 hour and 10 minutes, thus affirming that I made a good decision by going to Austin, Texas, and not coming to Washington in my retirement. But I apologize to you for being late. So the bad news is I've gotten you off to an untimely start in this very important symposium. The good news is I'm already 34 minutes into my speech and haven't said a word, so you're already halfway there. Let me just thank General Hanna for inviting me to do this. Actually, Omar Jones initially, but you reaffirmed that and gave me the privilege of coming and talking to my old family. And what a delight it is to be here with each of you. Many of you I've served with along the way. I look around the room and see some familiar faces that helped me communicate and made me a better general as well as a better communicator. I'm very proud of General Hanna. So she was in ACPA when I was the Chief of Public Affairs, and we had her, snap linked to the Secretary of the Army. She was supposed to keep me out of trouble up there, but she didn't do that. But she did a great job taking care of the Secretary nevertheless. But to have you now as our Chief, that is outstanding. And having been the one who broke the pattern of a professional public affairs officer being the Chief of Public Affairs, and that pattern has continued up through Omar Jones until Amy Hanna. Now we have a professional public affairs officer back in as a chief. How about a round of applause for your chief one time? Very proud of you. Well, some of you have been out there in the trenches with me or down in the bowels of the first floor of the Pentagon and heard some of my thinking about communication. And I can tell you that it certainly became refined over time, but was relatively stable in the foundational thoughts. And my effort was to not only learn about those, especially when I was the Chief of Public Affairs, and had so much to learn, but to also apply these thoughts as an operational commander. And candidly, that was part of the idea of why we began to put maneuver officers in as the Chief of Public Affairs. The bottom line of that part was we weren't very good at communicating. Our leaders, our generals, the ones who are supposed to be speaking for the Army on a continuous basis, were doing a pretty poor job of it. And so a little immersion training was the idea. What I learned, of course, I couldn't begin to lay out all of the things that I picked up during that time as the Chief of Public Affairs. And honestly, even before that. I tell people a story about my entrance into West Point. I had been asked to do several public affairs things very early on as a cadet at West Point, and then, of course, it crescendoed when I was appointed as the cadet first captain or brigade commander of the U.S. Corps of Cadets, the first African American to do that. And that made a lot of news. And so I was in public affairs office all the time when I probably should have been in class. So thankfully, my grades were not publicized as a result of that, but the academy was publicized quite a bit. and I got to appreciate the public affairs profession all the way back then when I was a cadet, and candidly got exposed to the importance of deliberate, careful, focused communication from early on. And that early experience certainly carried me forward in my experiences in my career. As it turned out, when I was in my developmental assignments as a lieutenant, as a captain, as a major, and even as a lieutenant colonel, my commanders would often point the public affairs office to my unit or to me to be a spokesman, to help tell the story about what we were doing. And we never did that without the presence and the good counsel of a professional public affairs officer or non-commissioned officer. And for the PA NCOs out there, I just want you to know that you are extraordinary. I've served with you at many, many levels, so many different times, so many different ways. Sergeant Major, you got a great bunch here. And so I'm really pleased with the extraordinary capabilities of our professional, non-commissioned public affairs corps. And let me not leave out our civilians, too. By the time I got to West Point, I found that most of the public affairs folks I was dealing with were actually civilians. And thereafter, there was always a professional public affairs civilian at every place I went. And clearly, by the time I got to ACPA, that was the preponderance of the office. And the depth of experience and the continuity that comes from our professional PA civilians gives us a leg up, no doubt about it. So to our civilians out there also, some of you who served in uniform, some of you who have been with us the whole way, from interns all the way to the present, let me tell you how proud I am of you also. Really appreciate you, and thanks for what you do. So anyway, to fast forward, I found myself in 2003, being asked by my previous commander, General Tommy Ray Franks. Now, he's an interesting person, an interesting communicator in terms of what he does and how he does it. He does not like the press, and he had a bit of a disdain for public affairs officers, too, but he knew how important it was to communicate. He had been my division commander when I was a battalion commander in Korea, and as I said, he would tend to send Mike Chinoy or CNN, other persons or different news networks in our direction. And so he already knew what I could do with regard to trying to tell the story. I saw him in the hallway one day in the Pentagon. I was lamenting life. I was walking around in the usual Pentagon posture, which is pushing a P with your chin down the hallway of a corridor, just kind of walking around, not looking at anybody. And I happened to look up because someone was coming in my direction. It was a small entourage coming up one of the corridors toward the E-ring. And I was walking away from the E-ring because I'd probably just been chewed out about something. Brand new brigadier in the Joint Staff, working on the Western Hemisphere. I said hello to my old boss, General Tommy Franks. I'd also been his planner when he was a 3-star general at Army Forces Central and planned much of what unfolded in 2003, as I'd been a planner back at the turn of the millennium. I said, sir, I feel guilty. I'm sitting here in a building and you're all fighting a war, because Afghanistan had already started, and it was clear the drumbeat was picking up for Iraq. Anything I can do to help you, I'm in. Ladies and gentlemen, be careful what you ask for, because you might get it. And so about a month later, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, General Dick Myers, called me in and said, hey, Franks wants you, and we're going to send you down there to be a spokesman, to be a talking head. Those are the words used. And actually, I got recalled from Halifax, Nova Scotia in the middle of a snowstorm as I was up coordinating the U.S.-Canada military relationship. Got a phone call. Called back to General Mike Dunn, who was the acting J5 of the Joint Staff. He says, we need to get you back here ASAP. Can't tell you why. Get the next thing smoking. This is like 10 or 11 o'clock at night. I'm enjoying some nice Canadian beer with my counterpart. I said, I got to go. And so trying to find the next thing smoking when there's an East Coast storm that goes from Nova Scotia down to New Jersey was quite a challenge. But we got a flight out the next morning. I took off. This was a Thursday. I got home on Friday. I told Carol, hey, I got to go somewhere, probably going to the Middle East, going quickly. Don't know what I'm going to do when I get there. More to follow. And she is a good Army wife, helped to prepare me to move out literally the next morning. So Saturday morning, after quite a journey, I won't go into the full journey of how I actually got back through that snowstorm, but it was trains, planes, automobiles, get kicked off the train, get back on the train, and arrive at home very, very late at night. And Saturday morning, I called my team in at the Joint Staff and says, I got to go. I just got a new deputy the week before. I said, you now are in charge. Have a good time. Not sure what I'm going to be doing, but I'm moving out into the CENTCOM portfolio. About 2 weeks later, I'm in Qatar, and we are in the throes of the final drumbeat leading up to war. And trying to organize ourselves, I was not the public affairs officer, that was very clear. Ray Shepard was the public affairs officer, U.S. Air Force, and he had been augmented with a very strong public affairs cell. He also got augmented from the White House with a communications pro who came in, who's more political communications, but that was very important to the White House nevertheless. He was right inside of our organization. How then would we organize ourselves to communicate what was going on in the operation while maintaining operational security and protecting those friends of mine who were out on the front line in combat, and still being able to satisfy a hungry world because we were communicating to the world? A few years later, I was at the correspondence ball. My date was Barbara Starr, so she took me to the event. I still mess with her, and every time I see her, I say, how's my date doing? But someone that night, I can't remember who it was a very senior correspondent, said to me, you realize that you were the only senior U.S. government official, I didn't feel too senior as a brigadier, but the only senior U.S. government official who was speaking to the world on a recurring basis. I hadn't thought about it that way. Well, getting organized to do that was very important. And the PA structure that had been augmented over there was really extraordinary. It was joint, so it had some of the best and brightest from across all the PA fields. Some were focused in media ops to handle that massive pool of journalists who were there at the CENTCOM headquarters in Qatar. And of course, they had a high expectation that that would be the place to get the real skinny on what was happening. And they did. They got the big picture. But the big picture is not exciting. The embeds at the other end of the line were getting the excitement. And so the big name correspondents were with us in Qatar. Then some other correspondents who became big names were out there in the line of fire. And the tension that was happening there required a true professional corps of media relations experts who were in the mosh pit of engagement with the media every single day. And there were good things that were happening inside of there in terms of the information that was being provided and helping to keep the story going and filling in between the lines and answering questions, pushing out RFIs to the units in the field, getting answers back without being onerous. That was all good. They were also, candidly, herding cats. And that was pretty bad. You know, people were complaining about the fact that the latte was not warm, and we got people in combat. This is the reality of media relations professionals. And those of you who have done it or are doing that know that you not only have to attend to the work, the story, and the connection to those who help to tell the story, professional journalists, but you also must tend to the persons, the egos that come with that. And that can be a very onerous task, and I got to watch that up close. Thankfully, I could excuse myself from it because I wasn't the PAO. So I could roll in, build the story for what we're going to talk about from the operation that day, and maybe in the questions and answers we can go into that in a bit more detail because it certainly has relevance to the approach that many of us are now engaging in, where we bring together the communities of practice who are involved in communicating to several audiences and fuse them in their coordination, not their subordination. Okay, very important. Fuse them in their coordination, but not their subordination, so that each community of practice is brought to bear and we achieve synergistic effects on audiences that we intend to communicate to, and not creating unintended effects on audiences with whom we did not intend to communicate. We can get into that a little bit more. I may hit that drum one or two more times. So that whole process of building an organization that does that was reliant on PA professionals. I already spoke about the media relations folks. We had a planning element that was a real small set of 4 public affairs officers who worked side by side with me and with Jim Wilkinson, the person who had been appointed in by the White House. What I would do as a professional operations officer was I would know exactly what was unfolding in the operation, because I was also the Deputy J3 of CENTCOM at the time. And I would bring in the operational realities and then lay out guidance to all sorts of players, intelligence players, DIA, CIA, humanitarian assistance players, public affairs players, psychological operations players, cyber operations players, all in the same room. And we would hash out what it is we wanted to talk about and how we could illustrate it. And then I'd send them out to go find the illustrative material, find the video, find the picture, find the story, fact check it, and bring it back in within the next 6 hours. And then in the afternoon, we'd put that story together, hand over the sequencing. It was very much like a production in a studio. I was an executive producer or an anchor. I was going to be the personality on the air, but I was also the one who was building the story and validating what had been pulled together. Nope, take that out, shorten this one, highlight only this part right here, put it in that sequence, and then the pros would put it together. We had some broadcasters as well, professional broadcasters from the Air Force, from the White House Communications Agency, yeah, they were all military, and from the Army. And these public affairs broadcasters knew how to physically change the formats and make it possible for us to broadcast through a multiplexer that all of the world's networks used. That had been installed by the White House, a single multiplexer that went out to every other channel. So what did that give us? An extraordinary bully pulpit. We timed the sequencing and the start point of our briefings with the morning news cycle on the East Coast. It was 4 minutes after the hour, not at the hour, because, you know, there's all kinds of music and introductions and all that sort of thing, and one quick commercial that happens there. And learning about the sequencing of television broadcasting so that we could then synchronize our broadcast with that gave us the ability to stay on the air day after day. And if we started losing airtime, we had a number of tools we could use at our disposal. Who we called on. You know, some networks turned us off. Their correspondent might not get called on that day. So it was interactive in a large way, very dynamic. We had some interesting experiences there, like the deck of cards. Some of you who are, well, I guess there's a few of the PA professionals who were with me at that time who are still serving, but only a few of them. Most of them have now retired. But I remember being approached by Rumi Nielsen Green. I don't know if any of you know Rumi. So she was in media ops and was handling the mosh pit. And Captain then, Frank Thorpe, retired as Admiral Frank Thorpe, who was a CHINFO for the Navy a few years later. And I had been hunting around for something that could articulate that we have a close track on the leadership of the Iraqis at that point in time under Saddam Hussein. But I had to have something. I insisted it was something that was already available to the troops, or I wasn't going to go with it. Because we weren't going to engage in propaganda or puffery. That's against the law. It had to be truth. And so we hunted around, and someone said, well, there's a poster of the most wanted. I said, is the poster in units yet? And the answer was, not yet. We couldn't find anyone that confirmed they had seen the poster. Can't go with the poster. We're about 30 minutes out from going on broadcast. Still hunting around. Our DIA rep said, we've got cards that match the poster. All those have been pushed out in the field. We did a data check down to the, especially the Army units and Marine units. Have you seen these cards? Yeah, we just got them. All right, give me the cards. How many do we have? One deck in all of CENTCOM headquarters. I'll take it. So I took the deck, went out, and then we talked about it. Of course, Saddam Hussein's face was not on the top. Not once did I speak about him. His name was never mentioned by me. his picture was never shown. That was intentional. So that's a PA action to try to communicate a message that you don't count anymore. You don't exist. The cards then, after showing them, created an incredible food fight. The journalist said, we have to have the cards. You know, you can't show the cards and not give us the cards. Where are the cards? Give us the cards. And they actually swarmed. Rumi and the others. And as I was walking, I had the pack of cards. I said, this is a debacle. This is a disaster. We can't do this. You just broke a cardinal rule in public affairs. If you're going to show something publicly, you have to release it. What are we going to do now? And so my view was, calm down. This is where an operator's view comes in, different than a public affairs officer's view at the time. Let's scan them. It's going to take a while to do this. Let's scan each of the cards so they know exactly what cards are in there. And then we'll hand it back over to them in media ops tomorrow. That satisfied them a little bit, but there were still hungry dogs who were barking loudly and biting against our media ops folks. But that's what we did. 2 days later, the cards were available on eBay. A very incredible lesson for me at that point in time. First, how important it is to think about things in advance because there are going to be consequences. It was still the right call to show those cards. We could have done more preparation, perhaps, if we hadn't been in such a hurry to show it that day. We might have been able to do some better preparation with some PA coordination and not leaving them flat-footed or exposed to close contact, not with their adversary, but with their partner, the journalist. We also learned, though, that when something goes public, it goes way beyond your intended audience. What a great lesson that was. Don't forget that. When you release something, and candidly, and Chad Carroll can tell you this, we tried to always approach, even in our operations in Korea, even internal products, internal memos, would have the message we wanted to communicate in them because we expected at some point in time they'd become public documents. A leak could occur. An accidental compromise could occur. We might get hacked successfully. Someone does a FOIA and gets access to it and it's not redacted because it wasn't classified. So always communicate, especially when you produce products, with a view that it's public, no matter who you intended to send it to. Great lesson at that point in time. So I just wanted to share that with you. Let me just come back a little bit to this idea of fusion, fusing the coordinated effort. I was part of the Quadrennial Defense Review in 2006 as the Chief of Public Affairs. I was a co-chair of the panel on strategic communications. And of course, whenever I hear that term, my hair just starts standing up. You can't tell because my hair is so long right now, you can't tell when it's standing up and when it's not, but I can feel it. Because that term in the early 2000s had become synonymous with nothing that was understood. We need some stratcoms. Here's a stratcom cell, and they do stratcoms. Hey, what's our stratcom plan? And every time I'd hear that, it was clear to me that there was nothing strategic going on in the thinking. So my practice has been to reverse those. I don't talk about stratcom, I talk about communication strategy. Communication strategy. The primacy of that is communication. The utility of that is a strategic application of communication to achieve the desired effects or to reach the desired audiences. Okay? So during that Quadrennial Defense Review, we had quite a bit of debate, and the different service cultures were quite evident. The Navy, for example, was really viscerally responsive to anything that smacked of psychological operations. They wanted PSYOPs as far away from PA as possible because the perception in their practice was PSYOPs means deception. And of course, in the Army parlance, Marine Corps parlance, and to a moderate degree the Air Force parlance, that's not what it means. That's just one of the aspects of psychological operations. It's much more than that. And so we wanted to not throw the PSYOPs baby out with the bathwater and put it in a box by itself where it could achieve no synergistic effect. What we argued for was something different, that there are three primary audiences inside of the information domain as it affects military support to public diplomacy and information operations. All right, so here they are. One audience is foreign audiences who are not hostile. Foreign audiences who are not hostile. That could be a host nation where our forces are located. That could be everybody in the world who hasn't taken an adversarial position. It could be countries or people or entities who are on the fence. That's one population. They tend to be addressed through public affairs and defense support to public diplomacy. Because how we communicate ourselves as a nation to the rest of the world is called public diplomacy, led by the Department of State, but all agencies of the government have a role in it, and we hadn't been doing that very well. Foreign audiences, non-hostile. Their primary connector is defense support to public diplomacy. Foreign audiences who are hostile. The enemy. Those who support the enemy. Those who provide comfort, succor, sanctuary to the enemy. They're a different audience. They're an adversarial audience. And that instrument is primarily information operations to reach them. And we achieve effects on them that include causing them to make mistakes, make bad decisions, to fear their lives, all these types of things, which we do not do to the foreign audiences that are not hostile. So the effects are different. They live together, though. They read the same things. And so there are overlap points we have to be very, very thoughtful about. How does that foreign audience that is not hostile get impacted by or impact the foreign audience that is hostile? The third audience, if you will, would be our domestic audience, our stakeholders, which is our citizenry, the U.S. free press, and the free world press around the world, I would say, in large measure, since the content is shared. It's the Congress of the United States. It's the executive branch. It's the mothers and fathers who gave their children to you. It's those of us who serve. That's the home audience, if you will. And that instrument is principally public affairs. Whether it's through command information to talk to ourselves or community relations to engage with the public directly and help them to feel their army, or whether it's through media relations, those three primary conduits of public affairs activity. How do you cause a single communication action or effort to hit all three in the way you want it? Now, you can imagine a Venn diagram. I would use PowerPoint, but I don't like it. So I want to try to create a word picture with communicators. That's what you're supposed to do, right? Create a word picture so that people see what it is you see and can be inspired by it. Imagine three of those circles for those audiences and that they overlap. You will see that there's an overlapping point at the contact of any two, and there's a triangle where all three of them overlap. So that is 4 different intersection points. 3 of them are doubles. 1 of them is a triple. If you were a baseball player, which would you rather have? A double or a triple? Well, sometimes you just want to get on base, but really, when you want to get additional effect from a single swing, a triple is always better. Only a home run is better. The triple, then, the point at which those audiences touch each other, or a single communication affects them, and perhaps differently, requires strategic and operational planning. So why are you engaging with these audiences? What is it that you're trying to achieve? What is the outcome of it that you expect? That's the strategic aspect of it. What instruments are you going to use? When are you going to use them? What's the timing? Some of the tactics that inform the strategy. The operational planning of it then becomes who's going to do it? When are you going to do it? How is it going to be constrained? Who's going to clear it? I can tell you that as an Army and as a department, certainly the Department of Defense, but your Army PA professionals with some colleagues in here, I'm talking to you as Army professionals. Your greatest hazard as a communications professional is people like me who are operators who want to make sure they know that we have the target right before we fire the round. And the coordination process that goes with that requires validation by these leaders in such a way that it's untimely again and again and again. Or it's watered down in such a way that all risk is taken out and much of the effect is also taken out. It's true. I know it's true. I tried not to be one of those, and some of you who served under me can tell you whether I was or wasn't, but I guarantee you as a chief of public affairs, I was fighting against that all the time. So I want you to think about how you bring those three domains together deliberately. And for me, the answer is planning. So I was so glad that Elaine came out to grab me. She's from the Strategy and Plans Directorate. All right, that's outstanding. That's one of the formations that we created during my time as a chief of public affairs, and I'm glad that it's endured because that wasn't part of the normal parlance. Oddly enough, planning was not part of the PA culture. I'm talking about detailed, sustained, continuous planning. I'm not talking about making a plan for how you're going to go out with a rollout. That's planning, to be sure, and that was absolutely in the culture. But this sustained campaigning, sustained planning, where you conduct operations, determine the outcomes and the effects of it, and then conduct another operation based on that, that was not part of the culture, and it is now. Don't lose it. Very important. If you don't do that, what happens is you have pinpricks of information going out, watered down by operators who don't understand communication but understand the mission, who understand the nature of risk but don't understand always the nature of communication reward. Keep the planning in place. That's your best link to the operators like me out there. That is in their culture. And as a result of it being in their culture, they will not feel unfamiliar with the juju that you're doing as a public affairs officer. And that's how they might see it. Hey, look, I don't understand this stuff. Keep them outside the gate until we say they can come in the gate. And once they come in the gate, you handle them. Keep them off my back. And by the way, make sure the story gets told. Don't let anyone misprint. If there's an error, it's on you. I'm sad to say that is still out there. Now, we tried to work on that during my time here, and I encourage all of you to work on it. And Amy, this is one of the things you and I will talk about, how to build truly a culture of engagement. And that culture of engagement is led by, coached by, enabled by public affairs officers. You must be masters of it, or you won't get the audience to move the operators in the direction they want to go but don't know how to go in. And once you've done that and gained their confidence and have the access that you need because you're the true pros at it, you'll then have to work through the psychology of senior leadership, which may not be inclined to put the organization at risk any more than it already is at risk, because it's always at risk, but they don't want to add to the risk, like something that's misstated or mishandled, and it blows up in the press, and now all their time and attention is devoted to addressing something that's going to be a 4-day story, and those 4 days are concentrated on it and not the work that they're supposed to be doing for those 4 days. So they just don't want to deal with it. That's not good. You want to encourage them to engage and engage and engage directly with the public, wherever possible, and also with the media, and also with thought leaders. Find as many different conduits that you can reach so that the word that is shared by them flows in as many places as possible, just like those cards. Have you done the analysis to know upstream how to reach someone downstream? Have you done the analysis to know that if you use this form of communication, let's say it's social media, or it's a podcast, or it is a newsprint product, or it is a background role. If it's any one of those things, do you know where it ends up downstream? If you haven't done your intelligence analysis well enough to be an effective communicator. Drive them toward this. I'll close by saying that perhaps my greatest challenge was having the 3 stars of the Army headquarters. Those are the principal directors, some of the ones who were assistants, military assistants, the assistant secretaries, all wanting to have their own StratComs element so they could control the story, and wanting StratComs to be done out there for everything, but not being willing to go out themselves and talk about it. And so we had to work pretty hard to get them trained, confident, and experienced through repetition to do that. You're the ones who have to do that. So don't let the 3 stars back you up, or the assistant secretaries. Secretary of the Army came through and talked to you earlier this week and gave you a charge as to what he needs you to do. I think you got highly empowered by Secretary Esper. I really do. Don't abuse that, but just know what you're going to encounter in terms of frictions from the operators in there, and work through it. And as you go back out into the field to your various organizations and commands and directorates, do the same thing with your commanders and leaders there. Make sure you're talking to them and touching them so that they can move forward. Okay, that's a lot. There's a lot more on my mind, but I'm going to stop here and see what you really want to talk about. So can I get some questions, please?
Time for 2 questions.
All right, thanks. The questions are in traffic right now, so please. Good. I'm going to come down to the floor and walk with you in question and answer period.
Sir, Franklin Childress. In Korea,
Hey, Franklin.
that's one place that the commander and the PAO and the planning, everything comes together.
Yes.
And a lot of times commanders don't see that on a daily basis like they do in Korea. But the commander and the PAO are very tight over there for all the PAOs that have occurred.
Right.
How do we get commanders in the States and other places that don't have that regular drumbeat to have that empowerment of the PAO like they do in Korea?
Yeah, that's a great question. I had the benefit of people like you, Franklin, giving me insights years ago, and the great experience of Rob Manning and Chad Carroll over there as my PAOs. And it was my inclination to make sure they had access to me. So that's the first thing. PAOs, you have to have access to your commander. Beware the XOs and the chiefs of staff who will filter you away as just another staff officer. You're not. And you are also that. So you do have to be a staff officer inside of the staff, keeping the chief of staff informed, but you must have access to the commander so that you can communicate on the commander's behalf when the time is right to do so. Knowing how the commander's thinking, what is the commander dealing with? What's the timing the commander needs based on the relationships the commander has with others? So, for example, Chad and I would talk before I had a meeting with someone, like the South Korean Minister of Defense or the Chairman of Joint Chiefs, or when we were going to go out and try to send an information-powered message to North Korea. He and I would talk in advance about it. Here's the message we want to get out. Here are words you can use from me. I would say the words. So he always had a real quote. If you're going to put it in quotes, it better have come from the person who said it, or you're not telling the truth. Okay? Be careful on that. If your commander says, just handle it. Always come back to them and say, hey, boss, these are the words that I think I heard you say. Have I captured this well enough? No, this is what I mean. There you go. Make the edit, and you have a quote. But Chad and I would always do that. I would send it to him in advance. Chad, this is what I'm thinking. Here are my words that you can use. Here's another set, depending on which way you want to go with it and what the outcome is, maneuver that way. I think Franklin, the answer is there has to be practice. Some of it has to be codified. Perhaps the PA community can help lead by writing some doctrine that someone like Futures Command takes on or TRADOC takes on that goes beyond the PA proponency and affects operators. Here's how you work your way through synergistic communication, not only with the different audiences, but with the different shooters inside of your own audience, in your own organization. Okay, give me another one.
Sir Kim Hansen, Army Materiel Command.
Hi, Kim.
There's conversation about transitioning Army Public Affairs to Army Communications, and we all know that words matter. What is your take on changing public affairs, the actual term public affairs, to Army communicators and Army communication?
Thank you, Kim. It depends on how it's done. Now, I'm going to point you back to some work that we did in 2005 and 6. I do believe there should be an Army communications enterprise. Okay, so it's an enterprise activity like installations management. And PA has to play a primary role in it, not a secondary or tertiary role. It's the primary role. That's where the pros are. And it should be specifically still an entity within a communications enterprise. There should still be an office of the Chief of Public Affairs. There might be a dual hat, which is what I proposed, that the Chief of Public Affairs, a Major General, would be also the Chief of the Army Communication Enterprise. That's so that these boutiques that tend to pop up in the Army staff would be broken down by me, okay? And I had the Director Army Staff's permission to do that. We actually wrote the document, had it in staffing. The words were changed in 2006 to a communication enterprise. But a few years ago, I guess it was like 2012 or 13, we kind of moved away from the enterprise approach in the business transformation office. It's still out there. So if that's where they're going, I'm okay with it. If it is to subsume public affairs and erase your identity, I am not in favor of it at all. I stand against it and might be helpful in sharing that with somebody. Okay.
Actually, we can take more questions, sir.
Hey, outstanding. A block and bridge here, right? Who's another one?
Sir, I'm Major Jackson. I'm with the Defense Intelligence Agency, and I just wanted to
Where'd
let
you
you
go?
know that we just did right here, sir.
Gotcha, Major Jackson.
We just did a video on the deck of cards, and I
Yeah.
just wanted to let you know that it's
Did
out
you?
there on the Defense Intelligence Agency's social media spaces, and
Yeah.
you are, as hard as it was to find that video, your press conference is in that video, sir.
All right.
It was just released this week.
It's also in the control room produced by Al Jazeera. I still haven't seen it, by the way, because I witnessed it, so I feel like I didn't need to see it. See an edited version of the truth. Let me just give you a quick vignette on what Al Jazeera was really like. Of course, the U.S. had a lot of negative energy about Al Jazeera because they felt like it was enabling the enemy. I had a different view of it, and that is, how does an enemy of the United States do embeds? Why is it okay for us and not for them? And so that might happen. There might be someone who does have access to the enemy's information, and they aren't necessarily engaging in propaganda, but they're showing a different side of the story, to be sure. In the audience every day, Al Jazeera, we always made sure, and this is my direction, and I made sure that that didn't change, was within the first 2 rows. So they're sitting with George Stephanopoulos and what have you inside of there. And every day that I was out on the podium, I called on Al Jazeera. Their hand came up, I called on them, because they were the voice to the Arab world. And whatever question they had, it didn't matter whether it was a precise question, a propagandistic question, a provocative question, an obtuse question, it didn't matter. That's coming from somewhere in the world that we were stepping into. So we called on them every single time. One day, this is maybe a couple weeks after the cards, I was excusing myself away from the center and going back to the op center where I felt safe, leaving the PAOs to handle the mosh pit. And as I left the building right behind the green room and went to my vehicle to go back to the headquarters, the door opens up that the media can come out into the same parking lot. I hear a guy saying, General Brooks. And it's Omar Al-Isawi, chief correspondent for Al Jazeera at the time. He's running to my vehicle. I'm going, oh, Lord. What does he want? So I'll stand behind him. Hey, Omar, with the door blocking me. He says, I just want to say thanks. So thanks for what? Thanks for getting rid of Saddam Hussein. We appreciate it. That's not in the movie. That's the reality. Okay, let's go to another question. Do we have time for one more?
Yes, sir.
Okay. All right.
Sir, Derek Chang, U.S. Army Pacific.
Yep.
Sir, what would you tell commanders about public affairs as an advocate for public affairs? And oftentimes we'll hear our senior leaders talk to the PA community, tell us that we're value added, but we'll never hear that with commanders outside this forum. What would you tell commanders on the value of public affairs, and would ask this for you also with this advocacy? Every other senior leader that you engage in the future, will you continue to advocate for us so we continue to have access to commanders, so we continue to this consistency of engagement, shape the community activities, and create the conditions so that we can be more effective? What would you tell commanders, and will you continue to advocate for us with other senior leaders with your future engagement?
Thanks, Derek. It's good to see you again. And hopefully you guys haven't dismantled the structures I put in place there to help create that fusion. Don't let them. First, yes, I will continue to be a champion for public affairs and these types of approaches. And what I just shared with you today is a microcosm of what I have routinely shared with them. When I was the chief of PA, I went to every single pre-command course, didn't miss a single one during my 2 years or so in position, so that I could do that. And I was sharing these same ideas with them. You know, one of the other ones I shared with them is to get rid of this notion that, you know, you have one story and you have another story out there. This is the U.S. government story, and this is the adversary's story, or this is what's printed, perhaps. And someone will say, well, the truth is what? Somewhere in the middle. The hell it is. Truth is an extreme. It's never in the middle. Truth is something that is very difficult to ever achieve, and our position has to always be skewed toward the truth and short of it, because the full truth includes personal information, classified information, sensitive information of a variety of other sorts, and so we don't release the entire truth, but everything we release must be truth. How can that be in the middle? What does that mean? If it's in the middle, which way have you moved? Toward falsehood. And so whenever there's a truth that's somewhere in the middle, the liar wins. Trust me, I've shared that a number of times with every pre-command course. So every senior leader who's out there right now, from about 2006 on, that was going into battalion or brigade command, has heard that from me. I will be a champion. I will continue to do that. I think it's still important to do that. And I need all of you to be courageous enough, just as you are, Derek. Be courageous enough to approach your commander and say, hey, look, I got some concerns about which way we're going. I don't feel like I have access to you. I just want you to know that. You'll get a shot in the face from a chief of staff, but you'll live. All right? Hey, don't ever go to the commander like that. You know, I control who has access to the commander. Roger. And then see what the commander does. Okay? But you got to give them a chance to realize that they have been filtered. Just encourage them as much as you can. Amy can do a lot of that also. You'll go to the pre-command courses. She has access to the secretariat. She'll talk to the Army's most senior leadership everywhere they go. I know you'll be out and about going visiting commanders, and you ought to test them a little bit. Hey, what kind of access are you granting to your PAO? Are you getting what you need from your PAO? Am I providing you the right kind of quality officer inside of there? What kind of access are you granting to your PAO? Does your PAO have access to you? You know, say it as many different ways as you can, like every other message. Yeah, I heard your PAO's got good access. Is that how you see it? Your chief and I were talking about that. The chief says PAO's got great access to you. Is that how you see it? Ask 7 different ways if you can to get the point across. Access is critical. Do I still have time?
One more?
All right.
One more.
Morning, sir. Amy Crane from Crane Army Ammunition Activity. I'm also on the reserve side, public affairs officer.
Right.
And I was just wondering, is there any discussion on making public affairs or communications a branch instead of a functional area?
Amy, that has been discussed several times. I was part of the Officer Professional Military Education study for Force 21. So this is back in the 1990s. And we had discussions about it then. During my time as chief, we raised it several times. I felt that the Army was at a disadvantage because, this is my opinion now, we have a deeper core than any other service, military and civilian. We have a broader core. I found that some services were expert in the Rolodex for media operations and media relations, but they didn't have any connection with the public and didn't need it, okay? We, on the other hand, are the clearest extension of the public in uniform. The Army is. And as a result, we have to take the whole gamut. Our command information has to be clear because we have the largest force, the most diverse force. Our community relations and outreach has to be most effective because we have the largest body politic to take in and the scariest mission. And our media relations has to be just as good as anybody else. We need to know who do you call to make sure they have the story straight. Who do you give access to? I think that we have to be able to do that as a career field, and that it can go separate. Right now, someone like Amy Hanna is competing against someone like me to be promoted to Brigadier General. That should tell you the extraordinary nature of your chief, that she did that. And we had some good competitors over the last several years of my time on active duty. But they were often at-large positions because they weren't their own branch. The Navy, for example, promotes to need. And they're skillful about creating need if they want more promotions. The OSD positions that were around, as long as the Navy wanted to hold them, were all produced by the Navy. And then they held their own board and had a second and a third and a fourth admiral. So the Chinfo was only one of those. And by the way, the Chinfo, as the proponent, held the board and could choose, essentially, the successor chain, and dominate the defense media market. The Army had more talent. They had some talented folks, but not a very big bench, candidly. We've got a huge bench of extraordinary talent and couldn't get through the door. So we're always assistants and deputies to the Navy. And I've got nothing against them. God bless them for being able to see it that way and have the flexibility in the same Defense Officer Personnel Management Act that we operate under to apply it that way. So it's a policy question now, isn't it? Not a law question. The Army can do some things by considering a branch. At the same time, trust me, the closer you are to the operators, the maneuver, fires, and effects folks that you're combined with now, the more sustained the field of public affairs will be. If you go into your own world, someone will kill it. So we want to be careful about how far away it drifts if it's its own community. All right? I'll take more if you want.
Okay,
It's up to you.
We're saying time, sir.
All right, time. Hey, thank you
sir.
all so much for the time you shared with me and the privilege to talk to you. I'm out there. People know how to find me if they need to. But I wish you well. I'll step out of the way and let you lead, and you must be better than we were. And Brian Hilford, he said you're going to be better than any infantry officer anyway, so that's a non-for-attribution comment that got out. How do you like that? But we expect you to do that. And I will help you in any way that I can and the rest of the team here. God bless all of you. Thanks for what you're doing. And take it forward, all right? Army strong. Hope that's helpful. Good to see you all. All right.